Last we saw, Angel Batista planted a tracker in Dexter's car in the form of a pair of AirPods. If he doesn't find and dispose of them, the NYPD will definitely start investigating him as a suspect, and his secret life is closer to exposure than ever. But what actually happens if the police finally catch Dexter Morgan? The legal realities are way more complicated than you might think, and some of these outcomes would be absolutely insane. So today, I'm breaking down every possible outcome that could follow if Dexter were to be arrested, from plea deals to procedural nightmares, starting with his capture. The most straightforward scenario has Angel Batista leveraging the renewed investigation of the Bay Harbor Butcher case with the New York investigators to detain Dexter. Though there isn't exactly an official investigation into the Bay Harbor Butcher, Batista put Dexter on the radar of the NYPD following the murder of Ryan Foster. Dexter's son Harrison murdered Ryan, but Dexter was able to frame a serial killer, Mia LaPierre, aka Lady Vengeance, for the murder by planting his watch amongst the trophies from her other kills. But Batista knew better, and there is a good chance that lead detective Claudette Wallace does as well. That would be two potentially murderous Morgans on her list. When Batista confronted Wallace and her partner about the inconsistencies in their Lady Vengeance theory, he told them all about his own theory regarding his old pal Dexter, namely that he's most likely the Bay Harbor Butcher.
The Bay Harbor Butcher was known for hunting down and killing other serial killers.
Wallace has a highly addictive personality when it comes to obtaining justice, so she may not be able to let Batista's theory go. And if she can't, that will mean quite a lot of trouble for Dexter. Dexter would be booked in New York with protective custody, likely due to the high-profile serial murder allegations and serious risk in the general population. Extradition to Florida would become a legal fight if prosecutors there seek the Bay Harbor Butcher indictment. The defense could argue that evidence was previously attributed to Dokes and is now stale and maybe even contaminated, not to mention that the main evidence were the blood slides that are now a part of Leon Prater's collection.
Bought these from an FBI agent with a gambling problem.
Combined with the fact that Dokes wasn't even in town at the time that a few of the Butcher's victims were killed, while Dexter was there for all of them, it will become harder and harder to deny the fact that he is probably the true killer in the case. Without new clean forensics or a confession, a conviction in New York or Florida will become much harder. Prosecutors would pivot to a mosaic of circumstantial pattern evidence. It really depends on if Batista will arrest him, because he catches Dexter in the act of killing or just on his own hunches and private investigation without bulletproof evidence. Without new clean forensics or a confession, a conviction in New York or Florida will become much harder. Prosecutors would pivot to a mosaic of circumstantial pattern evidence. It really depends on if Batista will arrest him because he catches Dexter in the act of killing or just on his own hunches and private investigation without bulletproof evidence. The outcomes range wildly. You could see a deadlocked jury or mistrial on homicide charges, conviction on lesser charges, or Dexter taking a plea deal to avoid the risks of retrial. Harrison's potential statements loom as the swing factor. If he cooperates with investigators, it narrows the defense's ability to argue everything is just coincidence. Of course, since Dexter helped clear him of the Ryan Foster charges, and Harrison has begun to accept Dexter in his life again after that, the odds of him cooperating with police and watching his father be carted off to prison is unlikely. They would have to threaten him with something so serious that Dexter encouraged Harrison to do what he had to do to save himself, kind of like when he had his son shoot him at the end of New Blood. Otherwise, Harrison would probably choose his dad over anything. But there is still a chance that Harrison's sense of justice could kick in if he was forced to revisit all of the morbid and unfair details related to Dexter's work as the BHB. This scenario is frustrating for everyone involved. Batista gets his man, but not the clean conviction he's seeking. Dexter avoids the death penalty, but still potentially faces serious prison time. Harrison is further traumatized and left alone as his father languishes in prison, faces extradition, and struggles through a lengthy trial. The public doesn't get the clear resolution they want for the Bay Harbor Butcher case either, with many people probably continuing to believe that it was James Dokes. Dexter has been arrested before, and it changed absolutely nothing. Batista could end up looking just as insane as Maria LaGuerta, assuming he lives, and at the end of it all, more killers are free to kill innocent victims while Dexter rots in a cell. An arrest with no conviction will just serve as a waste of everyone's time. Theory 2, the confession gambit. Dexter trades truth for Harrison's immunity. This theory suggests that investigators pressure Dexter by highlighting Harrison's exposure to conspiracy and accessory charges, privately indicating willingness to shield Harrison from further investigation if Dexter simply admits to enough murders to close the Bay Harbor case once and for all. This theory would have Dexter provide a limited, carefully scoped confession that satisfies the symbolic need for accountability while minimizing exposure on cases with weak chains of custody, as well as cases that link him to the killings of the innocents like Maria LaGuerta and his sister Deb. In this case, he is strategic about which murders he admits to, focusing only on the ones where the evidence against him is already strongest. Prosecutors are able to lock him into a plea deal that avoids risky trials on decades-old murders. The terms could include life imprisonment rather than the death penalty, or even stacked sentences that run concurrently in exchange for guaranteed immunity for Harrison and a loose sense of closure for the victims' families. This theory would represent the ultimate evolution in Dexter's character arc. He would accept institutional punishment to stop the cycle of violence, solidifying his desire to act as a shield for his son, protecting Harrison and embracing his role as a father after all of these years. It offers thematic symmetry with New Blood, but replaces death at Harrison's hand with sacrifice for Harrison's future, which is what Dexter would want. Though Harrison would miss his father and face public embarrassment following Dexter's conviction, he would finally feel like Dexter was committed to prioritizing him over all else, something every kid wants to feel in their parents' presence. Harrison deserves to feel like the center of Dexter's universe at some point, even if it means they have to be apart for the rest of his dad's life. The confession gambit makes sense for everyone involved. Prosecutors get their conviction and closure, families get answers, Harrison gets a clean slate, Dexter gets to end his story as a protector rather than a predator. But it requires Dexter to trust that the system will actually honor the deal and protect Harrison. Dexter has problems with trust, but if he can confirm safety for his son, this theory could actually satisfy the most people with the smallest blowback. I'm sure none of the fans want to see Dexter in prison, but as he himself stated, some things are inevitable. Actions have consequences, and everyone in Dexter's orbit has had to face them. Of course, everyone but him. This theory would rectify that in the cleanest way. Theory 3. The code collapses in court. Pattern evidence carries the day.
No, babe.
The Bay Harbor Butcher.
This scenario assumes that new forensic or digital artifacts in Resurrection link current activity to the Bay Harbor Butcher's signatures strongly enough for courtroom admissibility. Prosecutors argue this with expert testimony on method and prior bad acts rulings. The judge allows significant pattern testimony, reframing the Doak's conclusion as rushed and flimsy. The state lays out a coherent story of method, victim selection, and opportunity directly tied to Dexter's movements, skills, and capabilities. The defense attacks chain of custody and prior investigative failures, but if any fresh, uncontaminated links exist, any material evidence found in recent months and years that maps back to the Miami victims, the jury dynamics shift dramatically. With no deal on the table for him or his son, Dexter fights the charges until the bitter end, but to no avail in this instance. He has always had a somewhat defiant quality to his personality, and Batista's betrayal combined with his incessant need to outsmart everyone and follow the first rule of the code could leave him incapable of just confessing. Even if some people saw him as a hero for killing other killers, the need to remain free to beat his new adversary Batista and stay with his son could be enough to convince Dexter that denial was the only path forward. Still, the outcome would be conviction on murders tied to the new evidence, even if other cases were left uncharged or unproven. Sentencing would be severe given the serial context and number of victims involved. Everyone would know he was the butcher in this instance, whether he continued to proclaim his innocence or not. The facts would be overwhelming, and he would face the ultimate price. This reflects Batista's evolution from the original series. He's not just seeking personal vengeance for LaGuerta's death, he's trying to restore faith in institutions and provide closure for victims' families. This theory assumes the show will provide enough new evidence to make the legal case actually winnable for prosecutors. It's the second cleanest resolution solution from a justice perspective, but requires some serious forensic discoveries that haven't appeared on screen yet. Batista would have his work cut out for him in this case. There are a lot of people and powers that he would have to convince, a judge and jury included, to see such a righteous, albeit disappointing, ending for Dexter. Theory 4. The procedural escape hatch. Tainted evidence sinks the case. Here's where things get interesting from a legal drama perspective. In this instance, Batista and collaborating investigators overreach in their high-stakes hunt, introducing unlawful searches or relying too heavily on tainted legacy materials to put Dexter away. The prosecutors would even possibly mount an aggressive suppression campaign, something that would undoubtedly sink their case against Dexter, especially if he had a good team of attorneys on his side. The defense could also rely on key evidence getting suppressed due to Fourth Amendment violations or chain of custody problems. With no confession and no clean forensics, the BHB case would collapse before a trial even begins. Once again, Dexter would walk free. If we recall the frame job Dexter pulled on Maria LaGuerta when she tried to set him up, we know that this is more than possible. She found the belongings of Hector Estrada in a trash can and even had Dexter using that very trash can the night before arresting him, but he was able to make it appear as if she planted it. This made her appear crazy and left Dexter to walk right out of the precinct without so much as a case to defend himself against. Prosecutors could salvage or try to process some charges like false identity, tampering with evidence, and obstruction, but the marquee murder counts would evaporate under this theory. Dexter would walk on any homicide charges while possibly facing time for lesser charges that result in far lighter repercussions. The consequence would be public outrage from some, Batista's loss of faith in the system, and a renewed personal pursuit that pushes the story back toward Dexter's brand of vigilante justice that fans fell in love with in the beginning. He could start anew, and we would have another interesting session of cat and mouse that ends in Dexter's smarts, keeping him and his family safe for a while longer. This outcome feels realistic given how aggressively investigators are pursuing Dexter. When you're hunting someone this sophisticated, the temptation to cut corners becomes overwhelming, but those shortcuts often destroy cases in court. And with the amount of personal investment Batista has in this case to an overzealous pursuit that blows up the entire case, if you are rooting against this theory, you should hope that Angel Batista can keep a clear head and play by the book as much as possible. Otherwise, the whole ordeal will only be a small inconvenience for Dexter before he gets on with his life as usual. Theory 5. Harrison flips. Father and son separated by leverage. This is potentially the most emotionally devastating scenario. Investigators could isolate Harrison, highlighting his moral injury and legal peril while presenting cooperation as the only path to a life free from his father's shadow. A corroborated statement from Harrison could become the prosecution's backbone, especially for conspiracy charges or specific incidents he directly witnessed. Harrison has inside knowledge that no other witness could provide. He was there when Dexter killed Kurt Caldwell. He knows almost literally where the bodies are buried. Dexter would face an impossible choice: destroy Harrison's credibility on the witness stand or accept responsibility for corrupting his son and killing people for decades. Consistent with his ongoing paternal character arc, Dexter is more likely to absorb blame than to attack Harrison publicly. However, he was willing to run from Harrison and abandon him again that day in the woods after killing Logan. Dexter has chosen his code and his need to kill over protecting the people close to him before, so it's not entirely impossible that he does so again. But he cares about Harrison in such a profound way that this might be the hardest choice he'd ever have to make. Still, Harrison could easily come off as more credible than his serial killer father in court. The outcome of this theory would most likely be a plea or conviction for Dexter, driven by all too believable insider testimony from his own son. Harrison would receive immunity or reduced exposure and a chance at genuine rehabilitation outside his father's influence. It could also result in Harrison looking as crazy as Batista and Maria LaGuerta before him, as well as feeling embarrassed and traitorous for even trying to turn on his father, let alone failing to do so successfully. Again, it would all be so emotionally devastating. There may not be the chance of salvaging their relationship again if this is what happens. This theory works because it forces both characters to confront the central question of the show: whether the cycle of violence can actually be broken, and if family really is more important than overt justice. Harrison choosing truth over loyalty represents his final break from the code. Before we get into the darker theories, let me remind you to subscribe if you're finding this breakdown helpful. all. Trust me, some of these scenarios get even more complicated. Theory 6. Shadow interference. Enemies corrupt the process. Resurrection's broader world building hints at organized networks and dangerous antagonists with resources to intimidate witnesses, corrupt officials, or orchestrate targeted violence. Dexter in custody becomes a target for elimination. An attack derails the legal process, ending with death, escape, or a heavily guarded medical facility storyline that changes the entire dynamic. If outside actors engineer an escape, Dexter faces a choice: disappear forever and abandon Harrison again.
Does Harrison know who you really are?
Or confront the network that freed him, risking recapture or death in the process.
If you are still here tomorrow, I will have you arrested.
This narrative direction shifts focus from courtroom drama to survival thriller, while denying the audience the clean judicial reckoning that some viewers want to see. The shadow interference theory acknowledges that Dexter has made enemies with resources and reach that extend far beyond normal law enforcement capabilities. Leon Prater's network, other serial killers, or entirely new antagonists could view Dexter's capture as either opportunity or threat. Theory 7. Technical acquittal, moral consequence. There is also a chance that the court exonerates Dexter on major counts due to evidence insufficiency or suppression, but the social and familial costs prove irreversible. In this instance, Dexter would become unemployable, he would be constantly surveilled and socially isolated. Harrison might reject him or set conditions that he and Dexter cannot meet. Batista would suffer as well, as he tries to create moral pressure in the public arena, signaling that legal acquittal doesn't equal innocence. This outcome explores a bleak freedom that feels more like punishment than victory. Dexter could win in court, but lose everything that actually mattered to him: his son, his new life, his social anonymity. This theory would be mirroring the much-hated lumberjack exit of the original series, as Dexter fades back into a life of shame from which he sees no escape. The technical acquittal scenario reflects real-world cases where high-profile defendants beat charges on technicalities but face social consequences that persist long after legal proceedings end. Think O.J. Simpson, P. Diddy, Casey Anthony. It isn't as if their acquittals made their lives any better. Beyond staying out of jail, these sorts of resolutions still end with the defendant in turmoil, people essentially left to live like lepers as social pariahs that no one wants anything to do with. Without the ability to fit in and manipulate people, the rest of Dexter's life would look so different and pathetic, it would feel like watching a cat get declawed. Sure, the cat survives, but the discomfort associated with what they've experienced will stay with them forever. Dexter being followed or even facing probation would likely mean no more killing, no more Harrison, no more true freedom. His life would be forever altered simply by way of being investigated at all. The show has illustrated this sort of ending before. We can only hope they do something more interesting than this, but it's not impossible that they go this direction, and at least this way, Dexter would face some kind of consequences for all of the deeply amoral decisions he's made over the years. It's like justice without legal justice. If an arrest actually happens, here's what viewers should expect based on legal realities. The venue would be where the current investigation is most active, so likely New York, with more and more involvement by the state of Florida and potential extradition motions to force him to stand trial in Florida homicides. Charges would follow a ladder approach, start with clean process crimes and work upward to homicide only when new admissible evidence exists that can survive defense challenges. In this theory, evidence priorities would focus on fresh, uncontaminated links, corroborated insider testimony, digital trails, admissible pattern evidence, and any post-New Blood forensic connections that survive suppression motions. Custody conditions would include protective housing due to the nature of allegations and the outcome of the investigation should it go in Dexter's favor. It could involve fancy protections like high security transport and careful media management to reduce jury contamination, thus saving Dexter from half of the consequences he should face as a result of living as a devious serial killer for decades. Looking at all these theories together, it's clear that there's no easy resolution if Dexter gets caught. Every scenario involves significant significant losses for multiple characters and institutions. The legal system struggles with decades-old evidence and contaminated investigations. Dexter faces consequences that range from technical victories with personal devastation to clear defeats with some moral redemption. Harrison either gets protected through his father's sacrifice or becomes complicit through his cooperation. What makes this compelling is that every theory has a legitimate legal and character basis. The writers have created a scenario where Dexter's capture could unfold in multiple directions while remaining true to established dynamics and realistic constraints. Whether we get courtroom drama, family tragedy, institutional failure, or something entirely unexpected, the foundation is there for a resolution that honors both the legal realities and the emotional stakes that have been building since Angel Batista first started investigating. If you enjoyed this video and want to see the moment Harrison's character completely changed, click the video on the screen.